My name is Judyth Sachs. I'm Chief Academic Officer of Studiosity. As part of our commitment to reconciliation, every year we have a number of conversations with Indigenous leaders about reconciliation, what it means for them, and what they see their contribution can be made to the institutions in which they work. These people are leaders and educators whose remit is to make a difference to supporting Indigenous students to be successful. So listen, learn, and enjoy the conversations with these Indigenous leaders as our contribution to Reconciliation Week. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Judyth Sachs. I'm Chief Academic Officer at Studiosity. Today, it gives me great joy to introduce Michael Donovan, who has had a remarkable career as a nurse, as a teacher, as an educator, as an Indigenous leader, as well as being a senior Fulbright Scholar. So, Michael, welcome, and thank you for making time to talk to me this afternoon.
Thank you very much for the invitation,
I
Judith.
gave the high level view of Michael, but who is Michael and what drives Michael as an educator and a leader?
Um, it's that's I don't know. Whenever I think of who, I'm a saltwater person, Gumbaynggir Nation, so that's always at the forefront of my mind. That's the who, and when I say the who, it's because of being a black fella in Australia. That's my centre, and me and my country is where I belong. Never been a person from that part of the lived in that country, but I've lived in places that I call home, like Sydney and Newcastle. I'm kind of owning Melbourne a little way down here as well, not quite as in depth, but all that is part of home. So that's who. As an educator, I suppose it's just that joy of learning. I think is probably one of the ways that I've found me here in some ways, but it was always a journey to get here. Yeah.
And so your PhD and was on Indigenous knowledges.
Yeah.
So can you just talk to us, because Indigenous knowledges, every strategic plan in universities has them. They
Mhm.
talk about them integrating them into curriculum. But what does it mean for you as an Indigenous male leader to actually enact that in a curriculum for diverse groups of students that populate our universities? But it's not only students, you're also having to educate we educators as well. So can you talk to me about what that means?
Yep. There's a bit of a journey to what that means, but the journey is I was really lucky. I was working at the University of Newcastle at the Wallatuka Centre, the School of Aboriginal Studies. I was a primary school teacher, and I stepped into there because there was a need for Indigenous educators to teach into a School of Indigenous Studies, and there weren't many around in Newcastle in the kind of mid-90s, early to mid-90s. And I was doing a little bit of work, and there was a need for some more, and I thought, I'll make a transition. It was only for a 12-month contract. That 12-month contract turned into 22 years. So again, it was something that I really enjoyed working within that centre and working with family, a community. That was the really important part. But it was also, I worked with, for me, the best educator I've ever worked with Deidre Heitmeyer. Deidre was our academic lead at the time. She now is retired, but she was a high school teacher. But she helped me gain better, I'm going to say, academic skills, or the way to verbalise what I think good teaching is all about. And again, what my views of good teaching comes primarily from that, but also at the same time, within Newcastle, they had the quality teaching framework, which James Ledwig and Jenny Gore, well, James Ledwig kind of developed with the support of Jenny Gore. And I was in the need, I was going to do a PhD, and I wasn't quite sure exactly what to do. I was going to piggyback on some of their research to do that. And so I got a really good understanding of what quality teaching was, because that's based on good research. So that's their structure is just on research of good teaching. One of the things I realised at the same time when I was doing that is that everything that I'd said about engaging with Indigenous students based on traditional educational practices, complete overlap on absolute everything that this wonderful 18-dimensioned pedagogical map was really about what Indigenous, there was only, I would say there was probably only 4 or 5 elements that didn't overlap. One of those being questioning, and that's not cultural practice, but in contemporary Aboriginal society, students don't tend to question because they'll get the information when they're mature enough to be passed it along. So those sort of things. But there were a couple other things that were kind of there but not really there. So that was my starting point, that journey, that starting point. And it led to my PhD kind of not talking about Indigenous education, but talking about education and placing Indigenous understandings and knowledge. So the research was based on the voices of Indigenous students. So I just spoke to 50-odd students in different settings, and they pretty much repeated themselves quite frequently about what good teaching was about. And also taught me some things, as always. Any good research, you kind of, I think I know my stuff, but then people will tell me things. I thought, you know what, you were absolutely right. And the students did that as well to me when it comes to good teaching practice. That transitioned, and again, I used to talk to education students anywhere from early childhood to secondary in one of the programs we did in Newcastle. They used to come into our school, the education students. So I left the School of Education and come and visited us. And so I talked to a really diverse audience. I transitioned when I went to Macquarie, talking about embedding Indigenous understanding, and then I thought I had a good grounding, and I felt I did. And I'm not really about a content expert. Also, as a primary school teacher, I don't say I'm a content expert, but I do know how to teach, and I use that to be able to communicate with people with expertise. And that's what I like to do. And just to kind of ramp that forward a little bit quicker, now while I'm down here at La Trobe, we have an Indigenous strategy, and part of that is to better embed Indigenous understandings. Now, I talk about Indigenous understandings, not Indigenous knowledges, because again, I don't want non-Indigenous people to be saying, I can teach Indigenous knowledge. I would like them to look at the concepts of Indigenous understandings and then align that to what they're talking about. So if you talk to any academic, they'll say, look, I can't crowbar, my curriculum is full, I can't crowbar anything else in there. And I don't want them to crowbar more things or do one little separate little one-off. Here's the one-off lecture you can do in your course, and yes, that box is ticked. I talk about trying to align understanding. So when academics are talking in a discipline area about a concept, hopefully we can build them to do some of their, and again, I always tell this to academics, I can't give you an easy answer. I always ask them to do more work. So I get them to read, look at people within their discipline, get them to talk about some of the interpretations that are similar on those concept areas, and then highlight some of those understandings that are the same, but maybe slightly different from a slightly different perspective. So that hopefully when students see them and go, okay, I've got, they're kind of the same, that's great. Good on you telling me these things as a student. Hopefully when they're out in the real world, they'll step across a question or a concern, or I'll be doing some work and they'll think, well, the discipline area tells me to do this. I remember that academic saying, well, from an Indigenous example, or that they look at it at a slightly different perspective. Hopefully that person then in the workforce can say, well, that looks good. I reckon I could meld some of these things together. The hard part then is for that person then to engage with Indigenous community. So that it's that shared understandings. And then hopefully that new bit of knowledge or understanding or an idea can be developed and improve the outcomes. So actually building new things to help Australian society benefit. That's the long version of where I want to go. But yep. I think it is about, look, you're not going to be able to crowbar stuff in. And I really think that concept of aligning things together. So when academics are talking, they might bring in readings from Indigenous authors, or they'll bring in work that looking at the Aboriginal community when they're examining a concept. That can be, in astronomy and, Indigenous people's understandings. It could be on land management. It could be on educational practices. It could be health data. But it's, there's enough resources in Australia that we can probably do that. But again, it's asking academics to do that little bit extra work to kind of be able to do that to support their students. And it is about supporting students to then take it further to support community.
So it's about awareness, being aware that, in fact, there is an Aboriginal perspective here.
Mhm.
It's then being able to draw upon resources and translate those into the context in which the student is learning. But at the end of the day, it's about the growth of the student and the teacher.
And I think that final statement pretty much is it all about. And again, it's not about trying to jam more new knowledge into the student's head, but actually also give them the opportunity to think whilst they're working on it. And it gets, the odd concept of time and thinking sometimes falls out of academic timetables because, we do have deadlines we need to get people to. And, we don't allow people to sit and talk and think within the tutes or amongst their peers.
So it's also a pedagogical intent as well. So I
Oh,
noticed that you do a lot of work on Indigenous pedagogy as well.
yeah,
So
yeah.
talk to me about what an Indigenous pedagogy would look like. And if I walked into a classroom, what would I be looking for?
It's absolutely relational. It's about the concept of being in that education, being in that social space. John Dewey said that from a Western perspective in the 1900s. But Aboriginal people have always done that. Their understandings are taught in the social context. As they're living and breathing and working, they're singing the songs that will align to their education. They will do practices, and as they're passing country, they'll remind people about those stories. So again, place and context and relationship is always part of the ongoing part of life. Doing it in a classroom can be a little bit different, but asking the students about their intent, I'm thinking as school students, but also as adult students as well, giving them the opportunity to think of more than one example to do their assessment or present their assessment in a slightly different format can sometimes be used. We used to, at one stage, ask students to do video assessments for an assessment. Very few students took it up. Some of them were very successful, some are quite entertaining, but again, they're all parts of those things. So, allowing that opportunity for people to respond in different ways and learn in other way, instead of the chalk and talk, as a school teacher may have said one day.
That sounds extraordinary. And it sounds as though it's about personalizing experience, but then generalizing it.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I know every learner loves to see themselves in the classroom. So being able to adjust, and again, it does make life really, you don't do it once and then you repeat. Every time you step in the classroom, you've got a slightly different audience sitting in front of you. So you need to make those adjustments and think on your feet at times to make sure you can kind of engage with them.
So if we could move on to reconciliation.
Mhm.
What does reconciliation mean to you? And what are your expectations of that in terms of practicing it?
I was fortunate enough to kind of live through the reconciliation period, and I was in schools at the time. And again, it was one of those I'm going to say, as a society, it was a little bit disappointing because it took a lot of push to allow it to be actually recognised. Now, I'm only talking about the 10-year period from 1990 to 1991 to 2001, but it took a lot to kind of become part of everyday conversation. We're 25 years since that point, and now it's a little bit more, I'm going to say it's much more evident, where the concepts of us as a society recognizing ourselves and our histories, combined histories, and then looking at how we can work collaboratively to achieve some sort of positive goals. Again, that's a lovely high level thing. And again, that's not always how it's seen and how it's heard by individuals. But more and more over my history in relation to reconciliation, I have seen positive change. I always tell people that, I'm still young enough to be impatient. So sometimes I'd love to see things happen faster, but I have always seen that positive growth, which is really good to see. And you can see that lovely work going forward. I suppose I was thinking about me in relation to that concept of, and I also think about me in higher ed in my current position, because again, I think I see myself more as trying to turn like strategy into what reconciliation means. So it is a bit about turning the strategy into that real lasting institutional change or practices and change. So that's what I see reconciliation all about. It's not about, whilst I'm here, people may be able to engage with me and they'll listen to some of the things I suggest, but I leave, it'll all have to be rebuilt again. What I'd love to see is for the institution and all the institution to take on their own responsibilities in this bigger picture and then make their own little steps, in their office or within their own departments and try to grow from that way. And again, it's always it's not just like one straight line. There's always unequal sort of pathways. But again, the idea of stepping forward is what I think reconciliation is all about. Walking together, stepping forward is what I think the principles of reconciliation is all about. Yeah.
So what does success look like? What does good practice look like in terms of, what you, and what does good practice and what does success look like and how do you measure it?
Some of it is about good Indigenous governance, and Indigenous governance is allowing people like myself to be senior leaders in an institution, have my voice heard and engaged with at all levels as part of the institution. That is part of that institutional change, but that also includes not just me, because I also listen to we have an elders council here at La Trobe, as many institutions do have an elders committee, and I engage with the council and I ask their advice, their direction, not what their advice, their direction about what they feel is happening within their communities and what La Trobe can do to make sure that we all move ahead. So all that governance is part of that positive change. And it's about kind of embedding those knowledges, embedding the ideas of Indigenous data sovereignty and part of that, embedding that concept that it's not just a one-off little thing, it's about an ongoing relational sort of growth and development. So we all kind of regularly trying to make contact, look at each other's ways of supporting each other to make that positive growth. I think I missed part of that question, that response.
No, but it seems from what you're saying, there are sort of institutional practices in particular governance that need to be in place.
Yeah.
But then you need to have the desire of the organisation to drive it and deliver it.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I've been fortunate. I'm just going to state that La Trobe, I think, has been doing some good things. I've only been here for a very short period, but I know the VCs who've been here a lot longer than me, or the previous one. And it was there was a very strong commitment to engaging. I'm going to say as equals, engaging as equals. So I do engage with the executive committee here at. I'm a member of the executive committee, and so I'm there at the table, dealing with every issue, not just Indigenous issues, but with the working of the institution. And so I help support and give a slightly different perspective on these views of the institution. And again, much of what I say and do is just what the rest of my peers do, but occasionally I'll be looking at it from a slightly different angle. Hopefully that'll lead to a bigger understanding and a bigger level of growth for our communities and our institution.
So my last question is, well, it's actually to two people.
Mm.
If you can give one piece of advice to Theo as Vice-Chancellor about how to continue the reconciliation journey, because I'm of the view it's never finished.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to Theo? And then finally, what advice would you give to government, both at the state level and the federal level, just to make sure reconciliation is still front of mind?
One positive is that I'm living in the state of Victoria. We do have a treaty. So that's there are some really big things that are, I'm going to say, possibly available for this good change. We're still waiting for where the government wants to go. So we've got the document there ready to sign. We've got the community stepping forward, ready to start moving forward. But we need to kind of have a larger understanding of where we want to go together. And together is the big word in that statement there. I think Theo is attempting to do the same thing. He's engaging with, and I know we've had some of these discussions with Theo, so he's engaging with the Victorian VCs. He's a member of that group, and they're talking about what they feel the institution should be doing. I'm doing the same thing, talking to the DVC and PVC Indigenous across my peer institutions in Victoria, and we're working out what we believe our institutions need to be doing. And then we need to sit and talk and listen to each other. And again, the listen part's the really hard part for everyone, because, you know, we've got city-based universities, we've got rural-based universities in this state, and we're slightly different, even though we're trying to get the same outcome. So we need to kind of think about that diversity and work out what we all can do to get forward. I think Theo, this is something in his mind, forefront. Again, he's only a relatively new VC, so he's still learning as he goes. I'm going to say he's still learning as he goes. I really do respect Theo, but he's still learning as he goes. He's doing some really good things. But, you know, I think I know with one of our elders in one of our partner agreements with a Shepparton, Manara Limited, he went and spent the weekend with the Uncle Paul Briggs and spent the weekend just to get an understanding of what living on country as a Yorta Yorta man meant. So he's also trying to walk the walk and listen and engage with that process. And I think that was a really important weekend for him. And it's been a really positive weekend for this institution as well, because that lived experience carries weight. And I think he's experienced some of that. He's engaged with that. And that also led to things like Professor Julie Andrews is the first academic at La Trobe University to have one of her PhD published by La Trobe Press. It's also about Where's the Mob? So it's about Aboriginal Melbourne for the last 150 odd years. So again, our press talks wider than just academic papers. It talks about community understandings, and, you know, the university, you know, push that forward as a really positive thing for represent the university, but also represent some of these expertise that sits within Aboriginal communities and Aboriginal academics.
Michael, this has been an absolutely delightful conversation, and I've learned a lot. And I hope that the people that listen to this in future also get a sense of both your conviction, your passion, but more importantly, your own lived experience that you're translating into the higher education sector. So thank you, and I hope that our paths cross again sometime.
I would like that to occur as well, Jude. Thank you.
And enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
You have been listening to Studiosity's podcast, Reimagining Higher Education, candid conversations within higher education, sharing stories of leadership, change, and best practice in teaching and learning. Visit studiosity.com.